A history of copper mining in the United States. Introduction. Copper has played a foundational role in the economic, industrial, and technological development of the United States. Long before European settlers arrived, indigenous peoples were already extracting copper from the earth and shaping it into tools, ornaments, and ceremonial objects. Over the centuries that followed, copper mining evolved from small-scale surface digging into one of the most significant industrial enterprises in American history, powering the electrification of the nation, fueling wars, building cities, and creating some of the wealthiest corporations and most notorious labor conflicts in U.S. history. This account traces that story from its prehistoric origins through the present day, examining the major mining regions, the technologies that transformed the industry, the human cost of extraction, and copper's enduring role in the American economy. Ancient and indigenous copper use. The story of copper mining in North America begins thousands of years before recorded history. Archaeological evidence shows that Native American peoples in the Great Lakes region, particularly around what is now Michigan's Upper Peninsula and Isle Royale, mined native copper. Copper found in a pure, metallic form rather than or that requires smelting, as far back as 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. This makes the Great Lakes copper mining tradition one of the oldest known metalworking traditions in the world. Using simple stone hammers, fire, and water to crack the rock, these early miners extracted copper nuggets and worked them by cold hammering into knives, spear points, fishhooks, awls, and decorative items. Because copper does not need to be melted to be shaped, unlike bronze or iron, this technology did not require the invention of smelting furnaces, making it accessible to societies without advanced metallurgical knowledge. Artifacts made from Lake Superior copper have been found in archaeological sites far from the Great Lakes, including the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic seaboard, indicating extensive trade networks that move copper across much of the continent. This ancient tradition, sometimes called the Old Copper Culture, represents one of the earliest examples of organized mineral extraction in what would become the United States, and it laid the groundwork, quite literally, for the industrial copper booms that followed centuries later. Colonial and early American period. European colonists took note of the copper deposits Native Americans had long exploited, though large-scale colonial mining was limited by poor transportation, insufficient capital, and competition from cheaper European copper. Small mines operated in Connecticut, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania during the 18th century, including the Simsbury copper mines in Connecticut, which began operating in the early 1700s and later became notorious as the site of Newgate Prison, one of the first prisons in the American colonies. These early operations were modest by later standards, typically employing hand tools, simple shaft mining, and horse-powered hoists. Copper from this era was used mainly for household items, buttons, and ship fittings, since American demand for large-scale copper had not yet emerged. It was not until the 19th century, with the rise of industrialization and the rediscovery of the vast copper deposits in Michigan, that American copper mining became a major economic force. The Michigan Copper Rush. The first great American copper boom began in the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan in the 1840s, following government geological surveys that confirmed the presence of enormous native copper deposits. The same deposits Native Americans had mined for millennia. Word of the discovery spread quickly, and by 1843 the region was experiencing what became known as the nation's first mineral rush, predating the California Gold Rush by several years. Mining companies with names like the Cliff Mine, Quincy Mining Company, and Calumet and Hecla Mining Company established operations throughout the Keweenaw. The Cliff Mine, opened in 1845, became the first commercially successful copper mine in the United States and demonstrated that large-scale copper extraction could be profitable. As deposits were traced deeper underground, mining shifted from surface digging to deep shaft mining, with some Michigan mines eventually reaching depths of over a mile, among the deepest mines in the world at the time. Calumet and Hecla, formed in 1871 through the merger of several smaller companies, became the dominant force in the region and for decades was one of the largest and most profitable mining companies in the world. The company built entire towns to house its workers, including schools, churches, libraries, and recreational facilities, creating a distinctly paternalistic company town culture that was common throughout American mining regions. The Michigan Copper District drew immigrant labor from Cornwall, Finland, Italy, Croatia, and many other countries, creating a multicultural mining workforce whose descendants remain a defining part of the Upper Peninsula's identity today. However, the relationship between labor and management grew increasingly strained as mining became more mechanized and dangerous. This tension culminated in the Copper Country Strike of 1913 to 1914, one of the most significant labor conflicts in American mining history. The strike, led by the Western Federation of Miners, sought an 8-hour workday, improved safety conditions, and recognition of the union. The strike turned tragic on December 24, 1913, when a panic during a Christmas party for strikers' families at Calumet's Italian Hall led to a stampede on a staircase, killing 73 people, most of them children. The event, still debated by historians, became a lasting symbol of the human costs of the era's labor struggles and was later memorialized in folk music, including a well-known song by Woody Guthrie. Michigan's copper production peaked in the early 20th century before gradually declining as the richest and most accessible ore bodies were depleted. By the mid-20th century, most large-scale Michigan copper mining had ceased, though the region's mining heritage remains preserved in museums, historic sites, and the Keweenaw National Historical Park. The rise of Western copper, Arizona, Montana, and Utah. As Michigan's dominance waned, the center of American copper production shifted decisively westward, driven by new discoveries and new technologies capable of processing lower-grade ores economically. Arizona emerged as the single most important copper-producing state in the country, a position it still holds today. Major copper districts developed around Bisbee, Jerome, Globe Miami, Ajo, and Morenci. The Copper Queen mine in Bisbee, developed in the 1880s, became one of the richest copper mines in the world and helped establish Phelps Dodge Corporation as a major industry player. Jerome, meanwhile, grew into a booming mining town nicknamed the wickedest town in the West due to its rowdy saloons and mining camp culture, before eventually declining into a near-ghost town and later being revived as an artist community and tourist destination. Arizona's copper deposits were often lower-grade porphyry copper ores, meaning the copper was widely disseminated in large volumes of rock rather than concentrated in rich veins. Exploiting these deposits profitably required new methods, most notably open-pit mining and, later, large-scale flotation processing, which allowed companies to economically extract copper from or containing less than 1% copper by weight. The Morenci mine, still operating today, and other massive open-pit operations became emblematic of this new industrial scale, with mining companies moving millions of tons of rock to extract relatively small percentages of usable copper. Butte, Montana, became one of the most storied mining towns in American history, earning the nickname the richest hill on Earth. Copper mining in Butte began in earnest in the late 1870s and 1880s, and the city quickly became dominated by intense corporate rivalries, most famously the War of the Copper Kings between Marcus Daly, William A. Clark, and F. Augustus Hines. These three men competed fiercely for control of Butte's mines, using legal maneuvering, political influence, and even sabotage in their rivalry, which became a defining episode of Gilded Age industrial capitalism. Daly's Anaconda Copper Mining Company eventually emerged as the dominant force, growing into one of the largest corporations in the world by the early 20th century, with operations extending far beyond Montana. Anaconda's influence over Montana's economy, press, and politics was so extensive that the company was often described as controlling the state itself. Butte's mines, worked by generations of Irish, Cornish, and Eastern European immigrants, produced enormous quantities of copper that helped electrify America, but underground conditions were extremely dangerous. The Speculator Mine disaster of 1917, which killed 168 miners in an underground fire, remains the deadliest hard rock mining disaster in U.S. history and spurred significant reforms in mine safety and further fueled labor organizing efforts. Butte's mining eventually transitioned from deep underground shafts to the massive Berkeley Pit, an open-pit copper mine that operated from 1955 until 1982. After mining ceased, smelting technology also advanced considerably, moving from small reverberatory furnaces to large-scale smelters capable of processing enormous volumes of concentrate. Electrolytic refining, which produces high-purity copper suitable for electrical applications, became standard practice as the demand for electrical-grade copper surged alongside the spread of telegraph lines, telephone networks, and electrical power grids across the country. Copper and American industrial growth. Copper's unique properties, excellent electrical conductivity, corrosion resistance, malleability, and thermal conductivity, made it indispensable to American industrialization. As telegraph networks expanded in the mid-19th century and were followed by telephone lines, electric lighting, and eventually the electrification of homes, factories, and entire cities, demand for copper wire grew explosively. Thomas Edison's development of electric power distribution systems in the 1880s alone created enormous new markets for copper. Copper mining and America's rise as an industrial and military power were closely intertwined. During both World War I and World War II, copper was designated a strategic material essential for ammunition casings, electrical wiring, communications equipment, and machinery. Mining companies ramped up production dramatically during wartime, and the federal government took an active role in managing copper supplies, prices, and allocation to ensure military needs were met. Arizona, Montana, and Utah mines operated at full capacity throughout both conflicts, and copper mining communities across the West experienced significant population growth as a result. Labor, corporations, and company towns. Throughout its history, American copper mining has been characterized by an uneasy relationship between powerful mining corporations and the workers who extracted the ore. Companies such as Anaconda Copper, Phelps Dodge, and Calumet and Hecla wielded enormous economic and often political power in the regions where they operated, frequently owning not just the mines but the housing, stores, schools, and utilities that workers depended on, a system that gave companies significant control over workers' daily lives. This concentration of power, combined with dangerous working conditions, low wages, and long hours, fueled significant labor unrest throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Major strikes occurred in Butte, Bisbee, and the Michigan Copper Country, among other locations. The Bisbee Deportation of 1917 stands out as one of the most infamous incidents in American labor history. During a strike organized by the industrial workers of the world, local authorities and mining company representatives forcibly rounded up roughly 1,300 striking miners and sympathizers, loaded them onto cattle cars, and abandoned them in the New Mexico desert without adequate food or water. The event drew national condemnation and remains a stark example of corporate power overriding workers' rights during this period. These conflicts gradually contributed to broader improvements in mine safety regulation, the strengthening of labor unions such as the Western Federation of Miners and later the United Steelworkers, and changes in how mining companies engaged with their workforces, even as tensions between labor and management persisted for much of the 20th century. Environmental legacy. The environmental consequences of over a century of intensive copper mining have been substantial and long-lasting. Open-pit mining operations left vast excavated landscapes, while smelting operations released significant quantities of sulfur dioxide and heavy metals into surrounding air and soil, damaging vegetation and water quality for miles around major smelting centers. Tailings, the waste material left over after or processing, often contained toxic residues that leached into groundwater and waterway. Montana's Berkeley Pit and the surrounding Anaconda Smelter region became one of the largest and most expensive Superfund cleanup sites in the United States, reflecting the scale of contamination left behind by a century of mining and smelting. Similar, though often smaller scale, environmental remediation efforts have taken place in mining regions across Arizona, Utah, and Michigan. These environmental legacies have shaped modern mining regulation considerably, with contemporary copper mining operations now subject to extensive environmental review, water quality monitoring, and reclamation requirements that did not exist during the industry's earlier boom periods. Copper mining in the modern era. Today, the United States remains one of the world's leading copper producers, though it now ranks behind countries such as Chile and Peru in total output. Arizona continues to dominate domestic production, accounting for the large majority of American copper mined each year, with major operations including Morenci, Baghdad, Sarita, and Bingham Canyon, Utah, continuing to operate using modern open-pit techniques, though at a scale and with environmental safeguards far different from their early 20th century predecessors. Modern copper mining relies heavily on advanced technology, including computer-modeled or body analysis, GPS-guided autonomous haul trucks, advanced flotation chemistry, and increasingly sophisticated water recycling and tailings management systems designed to minimize environmental impact. Companies such as Freeport-McMoRan, Rio Tinto, and BHP now operate the largest American copper mines, having absorbed or succeeded many of the historic companies of the earlier copper era, including Phelps Dodge and Kennecott. Copper's importance to the American economy has, if anything, grown in recent decades. It remains essential to traditional uses like electrical wiring and plumbing, but demand has expanded significantly due to the growth of renewable energy technology, electric vehicles, and data infrastructure, all of which are copper-intensive. Electric vehicles, for example, require several times more copper than traditional internal combustion vehicles, and renewable energy systems such as wind turbines and solar installations depend heavily on copper wiring and components. This growing demand has renewed interest in domestic copper exploration and development, including controversial proposed projects such as the Resolution Copper Mine in Arizona, which has faced significant opposition from Native American groups due to its location on land considered sacred by the San Carlos Apache tribe. Conclusion: the history of copper mining in the United States spans thousands of years, from the ancient Native American miners of the Great Lakes region to the vast, highly mechanized open-pit operations of the modern American Southwest. Along the way, copper mining helped drive American industrialization, fueled the electrification of the nation, powered the country through 2 world wars, and created some of the most powerful corporations in American history, while also producing significant human and environmental costs, from deadly mining disasters and labor conflicts to lasting environmental contamination. As the United States continues to navigate a transition toward renewable energy and electrified transportation, copper is likely to remain a critical and closely watched resource, ensuring that this long American mining tradition, rooted in some of the oldest known metalworking practices on the continent, continues to evolve well into the future.